What are these 6 things that are super common that if you have them in your candidacy, you need to really make sure that, again, they're either intersected in a really interesting way, you've taken them to an exceptional level, or you just ideally have other things that are going to be your winning lottery ticket and that are actually going to make you unique and niche. So let's go through here. This is from a large sample of students targeting top colleges. So number one, most common, most cliche activity is athletics and sports. So as I mentioned before, unless you are a recruited athlete, and I mentioned this many times on the podcast, unless you're a recruited athlete, you have not taken athletics to an exceptional level, and there is absolutely nothing unique or differentiating about this activity. The other really bad downside of sports is they are a large time commitment. A lot of students pursue sports, and so the uniqueness is basically like a 1 out of 10, and the amount of time that they take in terms of time commitment for a lot of activities that go into students' resume building is probably towards the top end. Like, these are probably among the biggest time commitments of any resume builder, while being basically the, bottom of the totem pole in terms of uniqueness, right? This has nothing to do with indictment about sports or that it's not good to be physically healthy, but there are other ways to certainly pursue physical health. You can go to the gym, you can run in your own free time, you can play basketball with your friends. You could, instead of doing 3 sports or 2 sports, you could do 1 sport. You can taper it over time throughout high school as things sort of pick up, right? And so it's just being very sensitive about the allocation of your time if you are very serious about accomplishing your goal of going to a top and highly selective college, right? So from a strategic perspective, and certainly from a time allocation versus return on your time investment, sports are probably, again, they're giving you the lowest return from a uniqueness or differentiation perspective, while also really saddling you with a major time investment. Number 2, super common, super cliche, summer programs. So summer programs, as we mentioned before, very common, not very impressive to admissions officers at top colleges. They can signal privilege. A lot of them are just watered down programs or courses for high schoolers. A lot of top colleges, they sort of have their name brands behind the summer programs, but they're basically just licensed out through a third party vendor. And admissions officers at the top colleges know this. And so it's just a big marketing game. It's just a big game of sort of branding of, hey, there's this, really, prestigious college's name with this pre-college summer program, but you need to be looking for things that show very high agency, very high initiative. The student has gone outside of structure. And what you don't want to be signaling is, hey, I signed up for an expensive pre college summer program. It's not unique. It's very common. A lot of students do it. Again, it can signal privilege. There's nothing very special going on in a lot of these summer programs, right? They're just sort of courses. And so they're not fundamentally different from what most students just do in school, which is they just take classes. And so you're just taking more classes. Number 3, the arts, but particularly music, right? So this is very classic activity that many students pursue, whether it's the piano, the violin, whatever it is, you're in band. It's just not going to differentiate your candidacy because so many students play an instrument or whatever it is. I've mentioned this in other episodes. If you've done this for a long time and you want to not sort of have it be, for naught or just sort of go by the wayside or not get any value out of it, you would have to find some way to incorporate it into your hook, your sort of defined passion, your through line for targeting top colleges. Whether that's music and psychology, or music and business, or music and math, or maybe it's just something, still within the wheelhouse of music. Maybe you want to position yourself as a music major, music minor, in college. A lot of times students will sort of intersect it with something else. But if you want to sort of get something out of it, you have to find an interesting or clever way to intersect it with something else, or to make it part of your actual positioning for college. And then a lot of times when you get into college, you can change your major anyway, or this might just be a minor. What most students cannot afford is they cannot afford to just have pursued music to a non-exceptional level. Again, if you're exceptional, like a recruited athlete, that's a different story. But what you cannot do is just have sunk a very significant time investment, and then just put it in your activities list and expect a college to care, right? It's just not impressive. It will just cancel out with all the other students who also pursue this activity. And if it's not relevant to anything in terms of your through line and your hook for getting into a top college, it's just a total sunk cost. It may not be a sunk cost in terms of your personal development or your interest or discipline, etc., but it will be a sunk cost in terms of moving your candidacy forward. Number 4, service. So this is community service. This is also things like tutoring. I've mentioned before, you don't want things like service or leadership, those sort of very generic maxims that people give. You want calibrated service or calibrated leadership. So you need to identify what your hook is, what is your through line, what's your angle for admission, and then you want to have leadership or service in those vehicles, in those areas, right? So if you've identified that your hook is related to philosophy, do you bring a service perspective to philosophy in any way, right? Do you maybe do some sort of volunteering where maybe you created some exercises or some books or some way of sort of communicating philosophy to maybe younger children, maybe at a local library, making it more accessible for them. Maybe you created some comic books for philosophy. We've had students who've done this. They sort of create, graphics or things that are much more sort of user friendly or kid friendly, explaining more advanced concepts. We've had students who've done this, at children's hospitals where they sort of take the diseases that the students have and they sort of break them down to very simple terms that children can understand themselves. Are you calibrating this service or this leadership in any particular way? And a lot of students will just do very generic community service. They'll do the soup kitchen, they'll do the breast cancer run, or whatever it is, just things that are very common, very cliche, Habitat for Humanity, the mission trips. And there are a lot of issues with these forms of service, which is they're very common. It's not clear to the colleges how genuine it actually is, or if it's just purely performative, or just something the student feels like they have to sort of do for college admissions. In some cases where it's required by the student's high school, that doesn't send any particular signal because you have to do it. It might be a graduation requirement, so that doesn't really reflect upon your passion or your emotional investment or connection to service in any way. So you really want to anchor service. You want to anchor it in your hook or your through line. You want to ask yourself, what are my unique passions, my unique interests, my unique strengths and talents, and how can I leverage those to give back, right? From a service perspective. That is the much more unique and differentiating way of going about this. Number 5. So, STEM activities are among the most common in a large sample of applicants. So these are academic clubs, STEM clubs, robotics, math club, competitions, honor society, math honor society, Mu Alpha Theta, AMC, any sort of competitions that are under the STEM umbrella came in at number 5 here. There are certain hooks that are much more competitive and much more difficult than other hooks. And so for students who are interested in business, students interested in computer science, students interested in engineering, students interested in pre-med or biology, these are going to be among the most oversubscribed areas of admission, majors, and just the most common narratives and hooks that colleges are going to see in the applicant pool. And it's not merely a matter of, is this a direct admit major or is there a finite number of, they can only take so many. There is, right? They can't take an infinite number of biology majors at any given college. Even beyond that, there is a certain frequency at which they're seeing this particular hook and these particular activities that tend to be associated with them at the colleges. And the less novel, the less unique, the less differentiating, it's just not going to be an asset to your candidacy. For students who are interested in engineering or STEM, very popular. And you just have to understand there are very common activities. Again, robotics for engineering students. If you're a boy, like even worse if you're an Asian Indian boy, even worse. And you have to just understand it doesn't mean to not do these things. But as I said before, if you have these things in your resume, you either have to take them to an exceptional level, you have to find a really interesting way of maybe connecting them or making use of them as part of your hook, or ideally you just have other really interesting vehicles or other really interesting pursuits where these don't drag down your candidacy because your candidacy just looks like a list of activities that everybody else has in their candidacy. And then the last one, number 6, is going to be, as I've mentioned, business. This was number 6 in terms of most common activities was anything business econ related. So DECA, FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America, anything that's related to business, economics, that general field, business summer programs, etc., is highly common. Particularly, business clubs, business competitions, and the like. You really have to understand that if you are in business, it's not that you can't do DECA, it's not that you can't do FBLA, it's not that you can't do these business extracurriculars, but you have to understand they are just going to be super common among a very crowded segment of the applicant pool, and they just will not differentiate you. So, sort of recapping everything here, our 6 most common. We have 3 that are just have been well known for decades that people have just pursued. They're sort of the very typical cliche, well-rounded activities from yesteryear when parents applied to college: sports or athletics, music in particular, arts a little bit more broadly, but music very particularly, and then service, community service, tutoring, any sort of form of service. And then we have summer programs, also super common among the sort of ones that are not maybe just pure well-rounded or maybe just a little bit more generic, but maybe are a little bit more specific towards a particular hook or particular field are going to be STEM and business activities, clubs, competitions, etc. But because those areas are so popular, there are a lot of students in those clubs and those competitions. If you're in those areas or those vehicles, you do have to understand the very non-differentiating nature of those clubs, those competitions. They're not on their surface very unique. And so it sort of is the burden is on you to make them very unique or intersect them in a very unique way, whether it's engineering with, music, or the performance STEM with performance arts, or business with, psychology, or whatever it is. You have to do more. You have to make them unique because they are not on their surface differentiating, or you have to really ideally have different pursuits in your candidacy that are much more differentiating on their surface.